All right, everybody, diehard fans, Giants fans, NFL fans. This is the day that we thought was going to come much earlier, a day that was more than a year overdue. The Giants firing head coach Brian Daboll here on November 10th, 2025, 20, with a 20-40-1 final record for Brian Daboll as the Giants head coach. Doesn't make it to the end of his fourth season. Joe Schoen, the general manager of the Giants, however, stays. According to ownership, they believe in the young nucleus of this roster and clearly are pinning the blame on Daboll and not on Schoen, the general manager. We will get into where that blame belongs, how you guys feel about that as a fan base. Of course, it's been a busy day. I flew in from Chicago O'Hare Airport. Woke up early, have been grinding, working the phones, working these stories, and getting to the bottom of how the Giants came to this decision off of this catastrophic loss to the Bears and what comes next. Who are the hot candidates? Who are the names to watch, both for interviews, for who the Giants are eyeing and targeting, who is most likely to fit with Joe Schoen, who are the more intriguing options when it comes to Jaxson Dart and the quarterback's development and the trajectory of the franchise long term. And certainly as it pertains to the head coaching search, I think it has to be remembered and we have to remind ourselves consistently as names come up and different interviews occur. This is primarily about one thing, and that is what is the best thing for Jaxson Dart as the Giants quarterback to lead this team into the future. Because if you can get Dart right, if you can keep Dart right, if you can build around the best of what Dart has shown, and interestingly enough, Daboll gets fired after a game when Dart played a lot of his best football that we've seen yet. So we see the glimmers and the glimpses and the reality of what is promising from this franchise quarterback, this 22-year-old first-round pick out of Ole Miss. And so the Giants themselves can't lose focus on what it means to hire the right coach, right? There are different types of coaches. Some coaches are offensive coaches. Some are defensive coaches. Some bring discipline to an organization. Some have a different style of motivating their players and getting the locker room's attention. There are going to be different personalities that cross through the room when John Mara and Steve Tisch and the Giants brass are interviewing these candidates, but they have to keep their eye on the ball. Keeping your eye on the ball means doing the best thing for Jaxson Dart. And I think ultimately what did Daboll in addition to constant losing, was not doing right by Dart. The Giants organization failed Jaxson Dart on Sunday in Chicago. The news of Brian Daboll's firing and the news cycle now that we're getting into of the candidate list and of Joe Schoen staying and all of those different conversations and permutations should not cloud the main story coming out of Sunday's game. In addition to the loss, was the Giants and the NFL concussion spotter in Chicago's complete negligence when it came to doing right by Jaxson Dart's health. A player who hit his head on the grass and was lying motionless on the field, not fighting for a lost fumble, who remained in the game for 2 more plays until it became obvious that he wasn't able to handle that. Not evaluated in between that moment during the next drive until after the next 2 plays and the quarter break. So there should be a lot looked into there. The league needs to take a close look at that. And it would surprise me if we've heard the end of that situation, because this is somebody's health, their career, their livelihood. And Daboll was being asked and told about the risks that he was taking and the Giants were taking with Jaxson Dart, particularly leaving him in at the end of games against the Eagles and 49ers to get some late points to pad the stats, to try to make a point, calling design quarterback runs, putting Dart's body on the line too often, playing an unsustainable brand of football that has gotten plenty of quarterbacks hurt here on Daboll's watch over the years, and Jaxson Dart becomes the latest. And I think that what John Mara and Steve Tisch saw was a head coach who was deploying this quarterback more to save his own job than for all the right reasons that come with running a football team. And losing every week is unsustainable when it comes to job security. But on top of the constant defeats, it was the complete mismanagement of Daboll of key things, right? There's game management, situational football, working the clock, those types of things. There's having your team ready to play at the start of seasons, which Daboll never was after that opening win in Tennessee in year one when they went to the playoffs. And there was just a complete lack of ability to learn from those mistakes and to adjust and to appropriately be a leader of a football team that had a good, strong handle on what the Giants needed to look like, how they could correct themselves, what their identity should be. Just not adequate leadership. And so the balance of Brian Daboll's Giants career, and thank you all for being here. I see Joey B dropped a super chat into the queue, so we will jump on this one first. But the balance of Brian Daboll's career is a 20-40-1 overall regular season record. That is a 3.36 winning percentage. The Giants are 2-8 for a third consecutive season, 3-19 in their last 22 games, 5-22 in their last 27 games, 5-17-1 against the NFC East, and 2-14 against the Eagles and the Cowboys, their two primary rivals. Now, given those statistics, it is really difficult to understand what Joe Schoen or what John Mara and Steve Tisch are talking about when they're referring to their belief in Joe Schoen as their GM from here on out and the person that is going to lead their coaching search. Be interesting to see whether that deters candidates who Schoen is comfortable working with, given the fact that it looks like he is staying. But shocking numbers when it comes to the win and loss category. And there's no question in my mind. Like one thing I will agree with the Giants on, and I've said this before, there have been a handful of games over the last few years, let's say 5 games over the last 3 years, that the Giants could have won if their coach had any idea how to finish a game and create a cohesive plan from his offensive and defensive and special teams. If he had any idea of how to run situational calls and play situational football. What we saw back in 2022 was Wink Martindale's influence on that process, that when Daboll was the head coach, Kafka, the offensive coordinator, they had a consistent and cohesive plan week to week of how to adjust to specific opponents and get it done. But Daboll was allowed and enabled by ownership and the general manager to then screw with the staff, browbeat the staff, finger point, blame, gaslight, fire good coaches. Joe Schoen, meanwhile, not re-signing good players. And really, it's just been a program that has been run by a fledgling operation, a first-time head coach, a first-time general manager. And ultimately, the Giants let it happen. And almost all of it was to their opponent's benefit and not to their own. And really, once Martindale left, they've only won 5 games since Martindale left and went to the University of Michigan. And what they have an absence of now in the organization truly is leadership. And I mean real leadership, because Schoen hasn't understood what it looks like when it comes to building a team. He more picks players than builds a team, if that makes sense, right? You can collect talent onto a roster. That does not mean that you have built a team. And so he has been learning on the fly and adjusting and tweaking narratives to make sure things sound or look better than they actually are. But the bottom line is you need to bring someone in when you're hiring this next head coach, if he is in fact going to be tied to Joe Schoen in an arranged marriage that, as we've seen in recent regimes with the Giants, this often does not work, right? The retaining Dave Gettleman after Pat Shurmur's firing and teaming him with Joe Judge, right? The retaining of Jerry Reese into Ben McAdoo. This is something that the Giants find themselves doing consistently. Doesn't have a recent history of working. They'll point to the distant past often, but that is a tired way of explaining how things work when it comes to the Giants. That is what they should not fall into. They should not fall into relying on how things were done 40 years ago. What you can learn from the 1980s, from the first 2 Super Bowl championships, from those times, you can learn the standard that is expected when you put on a Giants uniform. The standard that is called for, that you do not accept anything less than when it comes to effort, when it comes to taking care of your body, when it comes to not accepting less than your best, when it comes to understanding that it takes hard coaching and structure and hard work to sacrifice and get to where you want to go to, rather than just doing the bare minimum, the way that players have been doing on this team, Dexter Lawrence included. That's what you can learn. It's more about how you approach every day, how you walk in and think about what it means to be a Giant. And that's the head coach they need. Who is best for Dart, and who knows what it means to be a Giant and how to get there. Thank you so much for being here, guys. I know it's a late one, but it's been a crazy day. Been in airplanes, cars, Ubers, right? Had several stories to write and rewrite for the Daily News, working the phones, busy day on the phones. So thanks for being here. We're brought to you by MyBookie, Hooks, Rubs, and Spices, Boom Chaga Mushroom Super Drink, and Salaretta for Men here on Monday night. And we start off with Joey B. Comedy. He says, I am so glad Daboll is gone. They won't let them all go now, but Bowen and Schoen are next. Who's our next coach? GM, OC, and DC. Yeah, I definitely think there's a house cleaning here of the head coach or of the coaching staff coming. Kafka, though, I think depending on how the team goes and does down the stretch here, whether they win some games, I think Mike Kafka has a real shot if the team succeeds, if Dart gets healthy and plays well, as a legitimate candidate in this search. I don't think you should discount that. I think that's something to watch. As far as will Schoen stay, I believe that the Giants did commit to Joe Schoen here. I do think they left an out by not saying definitively he'll be our GM in 2026. But that sounds to me like, as they go through the interview process, right? Is there a home run candidate that they land who wants to bring in their own person, and therefore they have a kind of a trap door to get out of Schoen? But ultimately, if they don't land that home run person they're looking for, or that long shot, the more likely scenario here is Schoen will be the general manager in 2026, Joey B, and he will be paired with a head coach. Now, because you're asking me, we'll get right into the candidates here. And remember, everybody, subscribe to the channel. Hit those like buttons while we are live. Purchase your super chats or super stickers to get your comments or questions answered first. But started putting the list together today. You'll find a list in the Daily News tomorrow. Hastily put together, so wasn't able to do full capsules on every one. So I had some names just kind of in a list at the bottom of the story. But I tried to mention some of the ones who stood out to me early on up top. And the one I think that you should have on your radar as a legitimate candidate on the outside to start off with is Lou Anarumo. He is the defensive coordinator for the Indianapolis Colts, who lead the entire NFL standings at 8-2 at the moment. And Anarumo just has a big combination of connections to the Giants, coaching ability, and strong connection to Joe Schoen. So he is from Staten Island, grew up in Staten Island as a Giants fan. He coached the Giants secondary under Pat Shurmur in 2018 with James Betcher as the defensive coordinator. So he's close with Joe Schoen. They worked together for 5 years from 2012 to 2016 with the Miami Dolphins. Anarumo's son, Lewis, is a pro scout on Shane's front office staff, scouting staff. We all know, obviously, Anarumo's best Bengals defenses there were a huge part of Joe Burrow and the Bengals' early success. They beat and held down Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs to get to that Super Bowl that they narrowly lost to the Los Angeles Rams. And he was a finalist for the Arizona Cardinals head coaching vacancy in 23 that went to Jonathan Gannon. That was actually Mike Kafka, Lou Anarumo, and then as they were the finalists, that's when the Cardinals tampered with Gannon with the Eagles and swooped under and hired him. In addition to that, he also, like last year when nobody got fired, but there were conversations about what they were going to do. If Shane Bowen had gotten fired at the end of last season, then Joe Shane's preference on who to hire was going to be Anarumo to join Brian Daboll's staff there. So there are a lot of other candidates. He is a DC, right? Not an OC. Of course, when you're talking about Jaxson Dart being the priority, if you're going to hire a Lou Anarumo or any of the other defensive coordinators we're going to mention, the first thing that comes to mind is, what's your plan for the quarterback? What's your plan for the offense? Who's your offensive coordinator, right? So that's a legitimate question, a legitimate concern. And as one person brought up to me today, and this is something that's been talked about often in these coaching cycles in the NFL, but one risk of hiring a defensive coach as your head coach is that if they bring in a good offensive coordinator and that offensive coordinator succeeds early, they probably won't stay there very long because they're going to become a super hot candidate and become a head coach and go get paid. And so, that's what you get sometimes when you have a defensive coordinator as a head coach, or a head coach who, even if he has an offensive background, like let's say like Nick Sirianni in Philadelphia, they did end up bringing Kellen Moore over from Dallas and the Chargers to Philly. And then that goes well, but you can't retain that coach because young offensive coaches who have strong or great success with quarterbacks just don't stick very long if they don't have a chance to be the head coach there. So that's something to remember, but it doesn't disqualify defensive coaches. There are plenty of good defensive head coaches. Now, John Gruden also, to me, Joey B, this is a question of what ownership and the Giants are comfortable with. We know that he has the ongoing litigation with the NFL related to those leaked emails, which contain despicable comments. So it's possible that the Giants will not even consider him based on that. But if they do consider him because they recognize his standing as far as an NFL coach, a Super Bowl winning head coach, his proven track record working with quarterbacks and running offenses, and the fact that so much going well in the NFL now, modern NFL offenses, how they've evolved has been, branches of what Gruden has done. Sean McVay, of course, a John Gruden disciple. And so he is a name that is extremely intriguing. We also know he knows Dart, had a pre-draft meeting with Dart that we've all seen on camera on YouTube. And I thought in that setting, you could see a couple of things. Number one, Gruden really likes Dart. And number two, he also was giving him some hard coaching, even though he wasn't his coach, So I like seeing the dynamic of how he would work with him. You have like a real example there. And definitely Gruden with a ton of connections, somebody who I think if you're looking for experience right now, it's hard. I was going to say you want an experienced head coach. And I think ideally you would get that here. You also, though, want somebody who has either an offensive plan or an offensive acumen to get the most out of Dart and to run a modern NFL offense. So Gruden is appealing because he has both of those things. It's unfortunate there's that there are the factors there that could potentially rule him out, because he really is an intriguing candidate otherwise, who I would think would embrace New York. But Also is going to be in high demand in the college ranks. And as we've talked about before, feels like with the ongoing litigation against the NFL, it's more likely he ends up in college, but we will see about that. Other names that I'm interested in, and we can bat these around as we keep going through the chat, but if Kevin Stefanski gets fired in Cleveland, two-time coach of the year, he and the Browns really liked Dart coming out. They were one of the teams the Giants were competing with when they traded up. Wink Martindale, I think. Now, Wink Martindale is also a candidate to, like, let's say if Mike Kafka becomes the head coach, goes from interim to head coach, or if some of these other coaches with connections, Wink Martindale could also be a candidate to be a defensive coordinator again for the New York Giants, depending on how this goes. But I think he deserves to be in the head coach running as well. And there are several reasons why. Number one, he has interviewed for this position before, this vacancy before, back in 2020. Of course, ran those league best defenses with the Baltimore Ravens, and also pieced together a game plan with a roster much less talented than the one that we see on the field now for the Giants in 2022, and helped lead the Giants to the playoffs and win a playoff game there in Minnesota in 2022. Daboll wins Coach of the Year, but Martindale's defense really the engine of how they managed those games and how they were able to get the 9 regular season wins to get in. So since he has left, the Giants have only won 5 of their 27 games. They're 5-22 without Martindale. And I think that the combination of Martindale's familiarity with some of the Giants personnel, some people that he's coached, guys like Kayvon Thibodeau, Dexter Lawrence, the idea that he understands that you can't just run the same thing every week. You have to adjust to different opponents. The knowledge that there are plenty of people in the Giants building, even though his resignation was allowed to happen and that was enabled by the organization not putting a stop to all of that. Plenty of people in the Giants organization are well aware that it was a mistake letting him out of the building, and we're not happy when it happened. And the other thing is the Giants, yes, you're focused on Jaxson Dart, but Abdul Carter, number 3 overall pick. Here's a guy who is begging for somebody who understands how to attack protections of offenses, who understands how to mix up pressures and isolate certain players to get them one-on-ones and opportunities. Carter needs more direction. He needs more scheme that enables him to get home. Right now, the Giants, the fact that they aren't able to scheme Carter into a sack right now just to start getting him feeling better, get his confidence up. Martindale would be able to give you that. I mean, when he coached here, Deonte Banks, everybody thought that Deonte Banks was a legitimate developing number 2 corner in the NFL. And now people view Banks as if he can't play football. So there would be plenty of players, in addition to the way that they attack fronts and in the run game, there would be plenty of players and things on defense that he would be able to bring the best out of. Now, Bill Belichick also, of course, he's a 6-time Super Bowl winner, head coach in North Carolina now. The Giants have chased Belichick disciples for years. Josh McDaniels, Matt Patricia, Joe Judge ends up getting hired. And they've never actually hired the man himself, the 2-time Super Bowl winning defensive coordinator for the Giants. I don't think he's a likely fit here. Definitely don't think he would be a fit with Shane. But I don't think that Belichick would be as into taking the Giants job as he once was. He recommended Joe Judge to the Giants, and then the Giants went back on their word and did Judge wrong at the end. And so I don't think that relationship is where it used to be or would be in the place for him to take that job at this moment, but certainly worth a phone call, because given how Belichick's last NFL cycle went, leading him to take the Carolina job, I think he would be desperate, may be the wrong word, but I think an NFL team calling him, he would give serious consideration to anything. But it's just a matter of wondering does he let bygones be bygones when it comes to that recent past and take that job? It's hard to imagine if he did take the Giants job that Joe Schoen would remain the GM. I would say that. So Kafka, interesting as well. Now, he has interviewed for 8 head coaching vacancies and hasn't gotten any of them. Colts, Panthers, Texans, Cardinals, Seahawks, Titans, Saints, and Bears. But there's a strong argument to make if this goes well down the stretch of the season. That consistency for Dart, in addition to offensive acumen, a former NFL quarterback who also coached Patrick Mahomes, has been calling the offense into Dart's ear all season. So there's a lot to make Kafka an automatic, likely strong candidate, right? Like it's if let's say the Giants win half of their games down the stretch and Dart does well and they do right by him and you see some improvement throughout the roster. If that all happens, then I would expect Mike Kafka to be a finalist for the job, right? So like a top 3 at the end of the process name for the job. Other candidates that stick out to me, Clint Kubiak from the Seattle Seahawks, offensive coordinator, I think is a name to watch. Clayton Adams, the Cowboys OC, is somebody that people have a lot of respect for right now. Keep an eye on him. Guys with experience, Brian Flores, Mike McCarthy, Matt Nagy, have to admit, even though I think those guys get interviews, well, let's say definitely McCarthy would get an interview, you would think, Nagy, etc. Neither of them really does it for me. I mean, McCarthy would bring more professionalism to the operation, has interviewed here before as well. Not sure if that is the upgrade that would excite people around here. Joe Brady from the Bills, considering young, rising offensive coordinator, I think Joe Brady is definitely a guy that you would expect gets an interview, but given how the Bills are doing this season, and it's just, there's not a lot of head coach buzz there. I'm not sure that would be the New York fit. But again, offensive coordinator, working with Josh Allen, somebody to talk to. Adam Stenavich for the Green Bay Packers as well. And I know some other names have come up. I've heard people mention Steve Spagnuolo of the Chiefs, Jeff Hafley of the Packers, Antonio Pierce of the Raiders. I'm not sure I consider any of them likely candidates when it comes to being finalists for the job, but Antonio Pierce's connection to the organization obviously adds up to them taking a look. He has been around lately, but again, this is just my opinion. I don't think Antonio Pierce is the answer. All right. So who do we have here? We have Giants Chronicles. What's up, Chronicles? Chronicles is back. Unfortunately, I have no faith in this ownership group anymore and won't believe till I see consistent results. I understand that. Chronicles. And I think that John Mara and Steve Tisch inched their way back into that area today by making the right decision, even though it took too long. But I also think when they said, we understand how frustrated our fans are, but in the same breath, they're saying that they're keeping Joe Schoen. And by the way, they snuck the announcement that they were keeping Joe Schoen into a link. They post the tweet. Did you guys see it this way? They post a tweet with a graphic that has the statement about Brian Daboll and his firing and why. Then there's this tiny link. And when you click on it, it goes to the Giants site. It's a headline about Brian Daboll and 5 paragraphs about Brian Daboll. And then the 6th paragraph is, oh yeah, by the way, Joe Schoen is staying around and he's going to lead the coaching search. And then it's a quote from ownership about how they believe in the young nucleus that he has assembled. And so to Chronicles' point, I think ownership finally understood a little bit of what needed to change, but I don't think they fully get it and fully understand the fan frustration if they are going to stare us in the face and tell us that a roster that John Mara couldn't even say a year ago was better than what they had inherited is now suddenly a promising young nucleus. Into says it feels like the GM wanted to be cut loose from association with Daboll. They were attached at the hip, and he didn't want to go down with him. And their culture of scapegoating now, Schoen has no one's failure to hide his. Should go too. I agree with that. I don't follow the promising young nucleus comments from ownership. I think that even though there are some players on this team, like I said, I think it's more of a collection of talent than a team. Of course, Neighbors and Scadaboo, if you were able to snap your fingers and make them healthy and then add some better offensive linemen and better coaching, what could that look like? Good question. But it doesn't all happen in a vacuum, right? This is the same training staff, along with the ownership questions you just raised. This is the same training staff that has been around. The Giants consistently have injuries like this crop up and cut their legs out from under them. Ownership needs to take a hard look at all parts of this building in this operation. And to your point, Into going back to last January, Schoen and Daboll during the autopsy of last season, it became clear to Daboll that this was not going to be a collaborative hiring or firing anymore. It became clear that when push came to shove, it was, oh, it's not us. It's you and me. It's not me. It's not we, it's me. And from then on, their relationship changed. And even though they came back together to run the operation this season, in the end, it was always going to go this way when push came to shove. The only surprise of the process is that Shane Bowen didn't get fired before Daboll did. That's the only surprise. But there's some opinions out there that Daboll, because of how poorly he treated his staff in previous years, that at this moment he knew how predictable that result was going to be and that scapegoating could be viewed. And because he wants more jobs in the future, that he was trying not to fall victim to his instincts and his desires in firing the DC. Because let's be clear, Bowen could have been fired after last season and wasn't. And so the fact that then after some of the breakdowns that they had during this season, that the Giants didn't fire him and that Daboll got fired first, is very interesting. I think that also reflects in a meaningful way on just how negligent Brian Daboll was at the end. Gerald says, I hope having Dart will bring in experienced offensive minds to expand on his game. Dart is definitely an attractive chip. He is a piece. He is somebody who you can look at the Giants roster and say, oh, I have a chance to coach him. I can win with him. That is the biggest positive. The one great silver lining, in addition to, as you just pointed out, Gerald, and thanks for the super chat, in Jaxson Dart being a positive. Does this mean we're going to see Jameis Winston on Sunday against the Green Bay Packers? Does this mean the bat signal has gone into the air and it's Jameis's number 19 calling for him to save us from the monotony and the malaise and the disappointment and to inject some life into the back stretch of this season? Because let's face it, Russell Wilson is not it. He's just not. He's not the guy. Nobody wants to watch him. It was the wrong signing. Again, back to Joe Schoen, as Into brought up. Thank you, Into, for that super chat. I'm going to get back to the Schoen comment there too. We'll talk more about that. But that is, that is key. Because when it comes to Jameis, why is he here? He was here initially because the Giants weren't sure if they were going to get the quarterback that they were eyeing in the draft. So they signed the 2 veterans. They signed Winston, they signed Wilson. But then they didn't have a competition for the job at all. Jameis Winston never got a chance to compete, never got a chance to try to prove himself, to bring his experience to the table and show the Giants whether he was a better option. And so that was disappointing. Again, negligent on the behalf of the entire organization, Joe Schoen, Brian Daboll. And the result was an 0-3 start and changing to Jaxson Dart in week 4 to try to save the head coach's job. And now here, after a 2-8 start, Brian Daboll is out. But as I said, after what Russell Wilson showed in that last stretch of that Chicago Bears loss, and we know, even though Brian Daboll is not the head coach anymore, the sign that he showed in how little he believed in Russell Wilson running into the blue medical tent, right? That was an indication of where the coach was evaluating Russell Wilson as a quarterback. And so if that's how you feel about him, if that's how you feel about him as a player and as a coach, and if you also forget the relationship of Daboll, Russell Wilson, if you also just know from watching these games, like if you look at the Giants' points scored this season, game by game, right? And this is, again, why it's interesting that Brian Daboll loses his job now when he was actually just starting to score some points. But you can see the demarcation between when Russell Wilson stopped playing and Jaxson Dart started playing. Because the first 3 games are 6 points, 37 against Dallas, and 9. And then suddenly it jumps to 21, 14, 34, 32, 20, 24, 20. Like suddenly it goes into double digits. You see some 30s on the board and you're like, oh yeah, that's where Jaxson is, right? At least 2, sometimes 3, sometimes 4 touchdowns on the board, getting in the end zone. Russell Wilson's just not going to do that for you. It's going to be conservative. It's a different offense than the one that they run with Jaxson Dart. So I think it's time to put Jameis Winston in and let him sling it. Like, what do you have to lose right now? Put number 19 in there. Give him the rock. Give the fans an exciting thing to come to the stadium and see. Because assuming Jaxson Dart is not in this week, then you need to put butts in the seats. You need to give your players some hope to keep playing hard and to believe that they can win and hang on in these games. And you need to score touchdowns and not field goals. Like Brian Daboll not going for that 4th and goal at the half-yard line in Chicago. What the heck was that? Well, no need to criticize him up and down anymore and ask questions why he's still the head coach, because he's not. How does ownership justify keeping Schoen? John said, when he wanted Shador and Daboll is the one that wanted Dart. It would be hilarious if Daboll gets hired as Phillies OC. This ownership is a joke. I'm boycotting. So that is another interesting part of this. Now, Joe Schoen did like Dart. It's not like he didn't like Jaxson Dart as a prospect, but yes, he was very zeroed in on Shador Sanders as a priority early on in the process. And the person and the involvement that swung this in the direction of Jaxson Dart as the guy was Brian Daboll. So to your point, John, this general manager didn't even, like, if you believe Jaxson Dart's the guy, the GM wasn't even the driving force behind making him the priority, to your point. It's a lot, right? You're relieved as a Giants fan or somebody who follows the team and cares about the team because it feels like there's some accountability finally here. But you're also stressed because you don't know where they're going to go from here. You don't want them to continue screwing up Jaxson Dart here, because that is what happened here. They screwed with his career here and how they managed him and mismanaged him the last few weeks and in the Bears game. And it's just, on top of all of that, you have 7 more games. And are the Green Bay Packers fans going to take over MetLife Stadium the same way that the 49ers fans did? Probably. I wonder if there will be fan outrage still when it comes to flying plane banners and, like you said, boycotting and selling tickets or not showing up. I wonder if there will still be fan outrage that Schoen was retained. I will be curious about that. So like that's why I think the Giants should pull the Jameis card, because then I think fans will have something to come out and watch with some interest and intrigue. And I'm talking about with Dart being out with the concussion at this point rather than anything else. Because I could see, based on some of the reactions I'm watching right now and hearing from you guys, it feels like you are grateful that the Giants have taken a step in what you feel is the right direction, but you don't feel like they're done. And that's exactly how I feel. How they justify keeping Schoen, it sounds like they're hearkening back to the days of George Young having different head coaches. And like I said, there are some things you can learn from 40, 45, 50 years ago. I think the Giants at times, like when I first came on the beat, it felt like a lot of their thinking that got them in trouble often was related to, oh, here's how we did it in the past, not recognizing that they had to modernize, get themselves up to speed, and have a better understanding of what didn't work or what doesn't work now that used to work, and adjusting accordingly. And really, all these personalities and relationships are different. It really comes down to whether you hire people who are good at the jobs. And if you want to say that George Young succeeded with a new coach, so Joe Schoen might or will too, that's assuming that Joe Schoen's name belongs in the same sentence as George Young's, and that he's just as capable of adjusting and being somebody who can evaluate and select and build an actual team and not just collect talent and not whiff on drafts and not squander, even though his team loses so often that he has high draft picks every season. It's just flawed thinking on their part. Thanks, John. Hunter says, off topic question. Any chance we let Younghoe Koo get a run the rest of the way, see if he can be the future kicker? Because the days of Graham Gano are over. Hunter, I think it would make sense to do that. They did not put Graham Gano on IR, though. So it's certainly possible that they won't do what you're suggesting, but I don't think that's a bad thought. I think it'll be an interesting dance now between player evaluations and trying to get wins. But certainly Mike Kafka is going to be trying hard to get wins because this is his job. This is his job audition. Johnny says, from the very beginning, Schoen was the wrong choice. His fake process in picking Daboll was so poorly executed, the Giants are being sued. Poor cap management, bad draft picks, releasing and extending wrong players. Joe needs to go. Right. Being sued by Brian Flores over that entire process. That's a very good point, Johnny. Very good point. Well said. Great contribution there. All right. So who else is in the queue? We have, let's see. Savage Steve thinks they need a coach who has been a head coach before. Sublight says, love the streams, Pat. I know it's unlikely, but does Kafka have a shot at being a more permanent head coach? He was a popular pick not so long ago. Yes, I do. Let's see. Hirsch, what's going on? Tiger says Lane Kiffin. I'm not sure Lane Kiffin. I think he likes college, and he certainly has a ton of leverage. So what's the harm in letting your name be out there for an NFL job? And hey, nothing wrong with leveraging to get more money wherever you end up. But I don't think Lane Kiffin's going to be the guy. Daniel says, please tell me Pierce, Spagnuolo, and Belichick are not options. I struggle to believe that Pierce and Spagnuolo would be legitimate options, even if they do get an interview because of their connections. Belichick, like I said, I think you investigate that just like they always have, but I'm not quite sure he's in the same space to want to come to the Giants anymore. Cruzan says Schoen is not going anywhere. Well, certainly that's what the Giants said today, at least for now. Directed says you got what you wished for, Pat. Directed, this is definitely not what I wished for. It was what I thought should happen and would happen based on the lack of results. I think that it's a disservice to you, the fans, and to the players when the general manager and the coach and the owners are not doing everything in their power and ability to put the best product on the field. And there's just nothing right about tolerating bad football, bad results, and a bad product. And the Giants, for too long here, tolerated something way below what they always say their standard is. And so that was the message. I don't root for people to get fired and lose their jobs and things like that. This is the business we're in. The business we are in is a bottom line business where GMs and coaches get paid multi-million dollars a year to coach football games. And when they win, they get paid more. And when they lose their jobs. And my job is to cover a lot about this game and about this team and this franchise and this league. But certainly when it comes to accountability, I think there is a shortage of that, whether it's people taking it or holding people to it. And I do believe my role, in part as an analyst and as a reporter and as somebody on the inside, is to bring you guys the truth about what I see, what I hear, what I know, and then just what I believe and my takeaways of how the organization should proceed from there. And, that's where I came in on all of this. Was I know this isn't the right way to do things. I know this isn't a good product. I know it's not going to get better. I understand the reasons why. And I know that nothing was going to meaningfully change until the Giants changed the person running it. And they changed one of the two. But again, if they keep the same general manager, they're risking dragging this right back down into the gutter. Right. Delay of game mismanagement, et cetera. Yep. E-Man says Daboll got an inflated head after 2022. Dan says, glad you made it home safe, Pat. Thank you, Dan. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, with the airports and the delays, with the government shutdown on top of weather, it was an interesting day, but made it home finally. Thank you. Dan says the same guy they allowed to hire Daboll, they are now allowing to hire the next head coach or head up the search for the next head coach. Make it make sense. Dan points out keeping Schoen is just keeping this train going. They keep the GM and fire the head coach. They did this with Shermer too. James says Mara does not know how to run a football team. Why do you keep the GM who built this crappy roster, who let talented players walk away without getting anything back? Tisch needs to take over. Let's see. Daniel thinks it's been more than 5 games that have been lost just because of bad coaching. He says 4 of them happened this season already. Cowboys, Saints, Broncos, Bears. So Daniel brings up the point. This is what the Giants' argument is when it comes to keeping Schoen and not Daboll. The Giants are looking at the games Daniel's talking about and saying, we made the plays to look like the better team for stretches of all 4 of those games. They're saying we have the talent to win those games. We weren't putting our players in the positions to actually make the plays. So that is their judgment. Now, I think it is wrong to look at those results and say that it's all on the coaching and none of it is on the quality of players on the field. There is a part of it, a large part of it, that is the coaching. But to think that the Giants did not suffer from talent issues or roster concerns and holes in their defense and offense in some of those games and inability to finish. Part of it is motivational, part of it is schematic. Another part of it is my best on your best. Let's see who wins, right? So that is what they're betting on, though, is what you're saying, Daniel. They're saying, hey, we're 2-8, but 4 of our losses are games that we put on our coaching staff and we think we were talented enough to win. So if you flip those, then you're 6-4. So we'll see if they're proven right. Dan says they did this when they fired Tom Coughlin as well. They scapegoated arguably the best head coach his franchise has ever had in Coughlin and allowed Reese to keep his job. Socrates says they need to hire a president of football operations to make decisions. That can work. That can also at times put too many cooks or another cook in the kitchen. So, but I know what you're saying, Socrates. You want a buffer between ownership and the primary football decisions of this organization, because John Mara is the president and CEO. And so he serves both roles, and therefore management or ownership is intimately involved and not removed enough. Let's see. Socrates wants the Steelers to keep losing so they get rid of Tomlin so we can hire him. Probably won't happen, but a guy can hope. Hunter says, I saw an idea I want nothing to do with. End of year, if Bills fall short, they fire McDermott and promote Joe Brady, and then Sean McDermott comes to the Giants. That would surprise me. Like, let's say Kafka has success with Dart, or unless you're saying he would come here and he would bring a different offensive coordinator here. Yeah, that one would surprise me. But would McDermott get an interview if he was fired by the Bills? You know, I mean, I would think he would. Yeah, and if he came here, who's his offensive coordinator? That's my question there too. And frankly, the Bills defense hasn't been very impressive in recent years. Yes, Clint Kubiak, popular candidate of somebody who's getting the most out of Sam Darnold and the Seahawks offense right now, and obviously has the pedigree, son of Gary Kubiak. Jacob says, smack that like and sub button for the best reporter on YouTube. Thank you, Jacob. I appreciate that. Patrick Grove says Kafka must account for the soft defense. Yeah, that'll be interesting to see. He's got a lot on his plate. Dan says Clint has the Seahawks offense flying, 3rd in the league. Darnold has MVP numbers. He has average running backs, and they are still a threat in the run game. Steven says it's up to you, Pat, to get Schoen fired too. Jacob says, looking at some of the odds, seems like a few college coaches are up there. Freeman, Kiffin, etc. What are you hearing, and what are your thoughts? A first-year NFL head coach. Bringing someone from college direct to the NFL who hasn't coached in the pros or hasn't been an NFL coach in the pros would surprise me. That would surprise me. I haven't heard anything like that. I mean, Freeman's definitely a popular name. There are some Notre Dame ties into the Giants ownership suite. So I do think, never say never when it comes to a guy who's been in the college football playoff like that and has that pedigree at that organization or that university, my alma mater. So I don't think that interview would shock me, but I think I would be surprised if they went the route of college head coach means we think it'll translate here. And also, again, defensive head coach, right? So what's your offensive plan? You do want a formulated NFL offensive plan for your young franchise quarterback. Patrick wants Rex Ryan. Steven says it's fortuitous the Giants kept them another year. They drafted Dart, Scadaboo, and Carter. I still respect Daboll as an OC and quarterback evaluator. It's not like the past useless coaches. See, Steven, I think Joe Judge was the best coach that I've covered so far with the Giants of the four. And that's because I think what they need is a CEO. They need a leader. And Judge was a leader. He knew what the Giants wanted to be. He knew the history of the organization. He was the one who started bringing back a lot of former players who hadn't been in the loop and bringing them back into the fold and welcoming and putting his arms around everyone, and was launching tons of initiatives during COVID to get out into the community and to collaborate with members of the community. And there was a lot to Joe, and there is a lot to Joe. And yeah, to me, that's what the Giants need, and that was more useful. And I think Daboll's offensive acumen is really Josh Allen. Joey says Tish is checked out, Mara is in control, and Shane is a smooth talker, so he's got his ear for now. But I think they will wait until the end of the season to find a new GM and bring some people in. That'll be interesting to see. Frankie says, I'd like to see what Kafka can do without Daboll's interference. Working under Andy Reid can only be good. Plus, he has the relationship with Jackson. Patrick says McCarthy is a safe thought. Daniel wants to know how John Mara's health will impact the head coaching search and GM firing Schoen staying. Well, it did not prevent them from firing their head coach mid-season, Daniel. So I think we get an answer there, right? We get an answer to, even though John Mara isn't well and is fighting, he and Steve Tisch got on the phone after that Chicago game, after a game that was unacceptable for many reasons, including the mismanagement of a concussion, and they decided enough is enough. So if they can do that now, and his health battle did not prevent him from making the right decision, then I don't think the health would prevent him or dictate his decision about the guy in the other chair either. I do think they're, just like John articulated to us a year ago, I do think that their desire for stability is continuing to cloud their ability to truly, fully, honestly understand and evaluate the team that they have in front of them and the general manager that they are employing. They certainly don't want to go through another hiring cycle because they feel like they changed so much and did so much differently and better with Shane than they were with Gettleman. But the thing is, anything would have looked better after Gettleman. And comparing a GM to Gettleman, you might as well give the guy a lifetime contract if the only comparison is Dave Gettleman. So that's not a reason. Patrick says, I can imagine Daboll at Penn State. Not as a head coach, though. James says they need to hire a head coach who has a proven record of winning games, who has been to the big show. That's what's interesting about Gruden, is like the list of coaches who fit your description, proven record winning games, who has been to the big show, right? Those aren't growing on trees in this cycle. That's the interesting part, and that's why Gruden is so interesting. Josh Soul says the crazy thing about Gruden is he actually loves QB3 more, Jameis. Don't we all, though? A lot of people want Clint Kubiak, including Hunter. A2 says, Pat, you did it 50%. Joke. Yes, Jesse Minter's a name. Yep. J-Fed says, if Kafka's first decision is to start Wilson, I'm out on him. Jay, I could not agree with you more. That is so well said. You're really looking with Mike Kafka for signs, to your point, of how much is he going to step out and be his own person and take this team in a direction that he believes, and not just shepherd it for Giants ownership and the GM. I'm skipping around a little bit here. John says George Young was great at the beginning, but he made mistakes. He couldn't adapt to free agency, picked Handley as coach, hated Belichick. Greg says George Young was given to us by the NFL because at the time we were sort of in the same situation as a franchise. Big Dog says Shane butchered the roster. He has to be fired. That dude has no business having say so on who the next coach is. What are my thoughts on Matt LaFleur? I think LaFleur has shown an ability to be competent offensively and to run a consistently competitive team. I don't believe that the Packers on any given day are obviously out coaching a lot of teams either. But I think you could do worse, and certainly Matt's record speaks for itself when it comes to. Let me double check his record. He's got an absurd regular season record. But there's the special teams issues that consistently crop up. Well, his record is 72, 35, and 1. So that's a 6.71 winning percentage. 13-3, 13-3, 13-4 his first 3 years. Then he went 8-9, 9-8, 11-6. Now he's 5-2-1 again. Certainly, if Jordan Love continues to develop and improve, all of that, in addition to those wins, and that record reflects very well. But I do think LaFleur can grow. Tonight was a night. Now the Eagles are a very good team, but tonight was a night where without Tucker Kraft, who's out, their top tight end and really their top target, he had become in the passing game. LaFleur and the Packers just really unable to generate much and adjust and find a way to get points. So I don't put him in a category. Like if I'm talking about top coaches in the league, I don't think of him, but he obviously has won a lot. Oh, interesting. GT says that he thinks if LaFleur were not in Green Bay, he would do whatever it takes to get him. Interesting. Can't the GM tell the head coach to tell the defensive coordinator to change what he's doing? Something has to change. Current Giants defensive scheme is terrible. I don't get it. Worst 3-4 scheme ever, right? Well, there's something else that's told to me consistently that is true. Defenses that play NFL. So defenses, stay with me on this. Defenses that play man as their base defense can adjust and play zone when it's needed. But defenses that play zone as their foundation cannot just switch to man in crunch time and turn it on and win games that way. So you can go from being a tough man coverage team that can drop into a zone when it's called for, but it's not as easy and it's not often done to be the zone-based defense that then suddenly switches to man and has success. Different keys, different physical traits, right? Physical skills that win out in man-to-man that you can use and deploy, that certain players are better fits for zone versus man. Like Daboll even mentioned it yesterday about how they were playing some man at the end and they weren't able to handle the Bears. But they're a zone-based defense. Richard Armstrong with the super chat says, what do you think Daboll's future is, Pat? College, pro coordinator? He certainly wouldn't become a position coach now. Good question, Richard. I think position coach makes sense. But there is a question of who is going to take Daboll onto a staff. Will he fit into an OC role again? A head coaching job and hiring and retreading him somewhere in the NFL doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I think that quarterback coach or, waiting it out, right? Because he has 1 year left on his contract. And the best thing that these coaches do usually is give themselves time and they let it breathe. And let's say a year later, when they're ready to go back to work and their families or their wives are ready to kick them out of the house because they're just hanging around too much, usually opportunities that you weren't expecting to be available or around pop up and the landscape changes and you find your footing. And obviously you're getting paid throughout that next season that you've taken off, for example. But usually, like a guy like Daboll, who has a year left on his contract like this, these guys end up, let's say, getting a consultant gig somewhere, let's say in college, and they're getting paid peanuts there because they're making the millions from the Giants still. And they stay in the game. They learn something new about the game they didn't already know, and they go from there. And they use that as a jumping off point, right? Nick Saban started that, really made that in vogue at Alabama, kind of revitalizing people's careers that way. But the thing about Daboll is he had such a history here of clashing with his own staff, and it just got so ugly in so many ways here under him. He would have a lot of explaining to do to get a high-ranking position in an organization. Joe says, Pat, the propaganda Giant fans cannot handle the truth. 20, 40, and 1. That is all you need to know. Jared, what's going on? Hooks, Rubs, and Spices, hooksrub.com. The code there is Talkin' Ball for your discount. He says, what's up, GCN, Joe, Tiger, and all the other Talkin' Ballers. You're the man, Jared. Deuce says, I doubt that Russ being QB2 was Daboll's decision. Definitely both of them. Let's see. Buckshot says, this is just stupid. Mara has to let all go. We are out. Let the young guys play the season and see what you have and evaluate in the offseason. Let's see. GCN says, Pat, Giants need a peanut punch coach and an interception coach. Giants never get any turnovers. Yeah, that's fair. To borrow a reply from Rocky 3, says Jay Berman, what is your prediction for Giants fans going forward? Pain. John says ownership should remember that the Giants made the playoffs after they canned Gettleman, the GM, before Shane. E-Man says, no, I don't want anything from Buffalo, meaning when we were talking about McDermott. Have you not learned anything? Jamal thinks something happened behind the scenes that nobody knows about. No, this was really about last night being the last straw when it came to Daboll's concussion, staying in the game, not being evaluated right away, when it came to not going for it on the goal line, coughing up yet another late lead. Now, I hear your point, Jamal, which is like you would say, well, what do you mean? They coughed up the Cowboys game. They coughed up the Saints game. They coughed up the Broncos game. How am I supposed to think this is the one that did it? Why is this the one that did it? Well, because the Giants don't act normally or rationally. Because to your point, yeah, he should have been fired in Denver. He should have been fired for Denver. Of course he should have. I mean, that was insane that nobody lost their job after that game. Insane. Pat, any Brian Kelly stories when he was at Notre Dame? No good ones. Why would Kirby leave Georgia? Talking about college coaches. Yeah. Some coaches don't want to be in college because they don't want to manage the NIL, but the ones who are able to manage it and don't mind it, that there's a lot of money to be made there. John thinks the sliding needs to fall on Dart, so it's not just all on the coach to protect him. David says, when you pay the kind of money they are paying the GM, the scouts, and all the other personnel related to the draft, it's unacceptable to miss on any of your first 4 picks. So Shane has to go. Joe says, Pat, the Giants hired a new doctor to clear Dart this week. His name is Dr. Mo Howard of the Three Stooges. Oh, Joe, you are funny. Dart knows baseball. He knows how to slide, but he doesn't want to, says Hooks. Youth and bravado can get you hurt. Unfortunately, I still love the kid. Timur Reyes says, Pat, hi, who would you hire as next head coach? I think I would be interested in interviewing anybody I felt like was a leader who also had a good plan for Jaxson Dart and going from there. So for me at the moment, I would be interested in Gruden, Martindale, Clint Kubiak, Clayton Adams from Dallas. I have to educate myself more on him. Stefanski intrigues me. I'm not saying he's definitely the guy, but I just feel like if he got out of Cleveland, he would be a hot commodity. I would be interested in talking to him. Socrates says if the Ravens move on from Harbaugh, he would be a good candidate, I believe. And that, and somebody asked here, Beloved asked about Monken. I don't think Monken, I do believe that a guy like Harbaugh would be in the running, given his experience. Monken, I don't think that would be a fit. John says the fact that teams reached out and offered compensation for Neal and Hyatt and Shane saying no in itself should get him fired. Who said that teams reached out and offered compensation for Neal and Hyatt? Some people saying that they think Daboll is going to be Philadelphia's next offensive coordinator. That would stun me beyond belief. How he knows what he's doing. Strider says, Pat, also about edge linebackers. They are poor against the run. Carter, Burns, and Kayvon aren't playing the run every week. It's off tackle and off tackle left and right. Our edges can't set the edge. They're definitely delinquent there, no doubt about it. K-Mac says the Giants had nobody that could speak directly to the media after the firing. Weak. I know. Way to stand up. Way to stand up for it. Joe Shane, nowhere to be found. E-Man says that's why you always want man corners to the defense, switch it back and forth. You can always switch. Wink knew what he was doing, no doubt. John wants to know if Saleh would get an interview. I know the Jets job was bad, but that's the Jets. If he got an OC from the Niners branch, he might fit the bill. Could see him getting an interview. I don't think bringing him back into New York is the answer, though. Socrates likes Kingsbury. Greg, I don't know why you hate Stefanski. They need to bring in a staff from the Rams, Seattle, Ravens, Bucks, Colts, Packers, Eagles, coaching trees, hopefully mix of Rams and Seattle, says H-Town. Hunter says, question out of left field. Do you expect online sports betting to take a hit in the NFL in terms of limitations to prevent stuff? I do think there's going to need to be, because I think it's starting to get out of control. It's starting to bleed into these sports and potentially compromising the integrity of these games. I do feel like there is going to be regulation on it, but there's so much money to be made by everybody that I think it'll also be there will be a limit to how much they regulate it. So do I think it's going away? No, but I think it's going to be tightened and regulated? Yes. couple people mentioning Kingsbury. Kingsbury had a good year last year with Daniels. I remember Cliff Kingsbury as a head coach in Arizona, and I feel like he's somebody, let's say he's a young offensive coordinator version of Steve Spagnuolo, where I feel like he's more of an offensive coordinator than he's a head coach. I could be wrong about that. When he gets his next shot, he might prove me wrong there, but I view him as a good play caller. But I think the next time he shows himself as a strong, sustained head coach will be the first time. And coaching here is not like coaching in Arizona. Some Kiffin fans, some Hunter says, does Kafka speak tomorrow? Please ask him the Russ Winston question, even if Dart does play. He will speak on Wednesday. So we won't talk to him tomorrow. We will talk on Wednesday. Yeah, Greg, I'm not saying that Stefanski is definitely the answer. I'm just interested because he has had some good years. I think that's an overstayed your welcome type of situation. Like right now, the way they're saddled with all those quarterbacks, the roster's not very good. It just feels like they should have wrapped it up with these guys a couple years ago. So I feel like it's grown stale there. I'm not saying he's the cure to everything, but he did some good things early on in Cleveland, was 2-time head coach of the year. I'd be interested in talking to him. Jacob thinks it has to be a guy that has ties to Shane. I do think that's a feather in anyone's cap who is. I do believe that's why Anarumo is a name to watch. John doesn't think any relevant head coach will come here to work for Shane. It's just not happening. Deuce says Kingsbury's teams melted at the end of the season. I think McCarthy would bring a level of stability and professionalism to the organization. I don't know if he would take them exactly where they need to go, but I think he might be able to get you back on track. Any shot of Josh McDaniels from the Patriots? No, I don't believe so. Colleges are getting tons of cash from their supporters for NIL and coaches. I'm not sure NFL teams are willing to pay what high-level coaches like Kiffin are going to demand. Good point, John. Guys, awesome super chat and awesome live chat here tonight. The super chat contributions tonight were from Joey B. Comedy, Giants Chronicles, Into, Gerald, John, Hunter, Johnny ABA, Richard, and Sublight. Sublight actually pointed out, I might have skipped this one. He said, love the streams, Pat. Just how much freedom will Mike Kafka have to be the sort of head coach he wants to be? Thank you, Sublight. I think that if you're either naming him interim to let him put his own stamp on the type of team he wants to be, or you're naming someone else interim. Like, I don't think you're holding his hand or micromanaging Mike Kafka. Now, he could be now in meetings as we speak with Joe Schoen talking about game day roster decisions and machinations. And Mike Kafka could be in a position where, let's say there's some conflict or a disagreement and a moment where he needs to stick his chest out and speak up for himself or what he believes. In those moments, he has to decide whether he's going to push back when he disagrees, whether he's going to stress that they need to make significant changes at key spots right away. Like, one example would be his quarterback coach right now is Shea Tierney, who is Brian Daboll's quarterback coach and Brian Daboll's right-hand man, and somebody who Daboll gave play calling to when he took it away from Kafka once. So does Kafka run the rest of this season with Tierney still on the staff? or does he fire a Daboll guy so that he has full control of the quarterback room, right? Those are some of the questions. Does he want to run the staff a different way? Does he want different people in different positions? What players does he show more belief in? What changes do we see on the field? I think Sublight, he'll have plenty of freedom to run this as long as he is forceful and sticks up for himself and conducts himself like a head coach and isn't a yes man. Because in this business, if you're a yes man, there will be people ready to pull the strings and puppeteer you. So it's on him now to step up. Good question. Let's see. Jacob says, Pat, is us not firing Bowen, does that tell you that they have no one they are confident that they can become an interim defensive coordinator? Yes, that is what that tells you. Gruden has been bad at times. Not a Gruden fan, but at least competent play calling would be in play and players would get better, says H-Town. Dr. Intel disagrees. GCN says Daboll asked the NFL for a rule change, end games after 3 quarters. Yeah, Tony Dungy's not the guy. Shane won't have the freedom to make too many roster moves outside of injuries, says Greg. Greg thinks that Kafka can push back because Shane is on a short leash. All right, guys, thank you so much for this chat and for being here. I know it's been late, but there was a lot of travel going on today, a lot of news, a lot of work in the phones, in the air, writing in the air from the New York Daily News, coming back from Chicago's O'Hare. I was in O'Hare Airport when the news broke, reaching out to people, and it was quite a day. If you follow us here regularly, if you're a diehard talking baller, then you know that we have kept you ahead of the curve here. If you're new to this channel, welcome. Please subscribe to the channel and please stick with us, because if I want you to know anything about what we try to do here, it is that I am trying to keep you informed and bring you the honest truth, not sugarcoat things. And sometimes it's harsh, sometimes it's brutally honest, and sometimes you'd rather hear a fluffier version of things just to feel a little bit better about your team for a couple of days. But I think that overall, our face-to-face direct conversations make for a constructive, full picture that we paint together of what the Giants' reality is and what their solutions need to be and where they go from there. And I'm grateful to everyone who has helped us build this, helped me build this. This is a channel that has grown, by the way. I believe during last night's chat specifically, we have crossed the 5,000 mark, 5,000 subscribers to Talking Ball Live with Pat Leonard here on YouTube. So really grateful to you guys for getting to that 5,000 mark. And we are only up from here. We will have plenty more this week on my social media channels, P Leonard NYDN on X, PL on NFL everywhere else, including here on the YouTube channel, PL on NFL on YouTube. Talking Ball with Pat Leonard. We have a Talking Ball merch store that you can check out on my YouTube homepage. And also MyBookie, Hooks, Rubs, and Spices, Boom Chaga, Mushroom Super Drink. Go support our sponsors, as well as Sal Loretta for Men in Midland Park, New Jersey. Jared from Hook says, thanks, Chat and Pat. You all have a great one. Richard says, thank you. Jacob says, great work. Yeah, let's go, Jacob. Over 5K. Isn't that awesome? Francis says, yes, thanks, Pat. Another good chat. Wow, you had a busy day. No doubt I did. Hunter, you have a good one as well. Thank you for being here. Thanks for help driving the chat. Greg, you appreciate that. Well, I appreciate you. Thank you so much. We went for basically an hour and a half tonight. If you missed the full chat, you can check out what we went over as far as candidates on the chat rewind on the YouTube channel here. Thank you. Signing off. Take care, guys.